They stole the promotion James Carter, 38, had earned through years of relentless work, handing it to a man who copied my report. But they didn't know I was about to expose their lies and rewrite the game. I'd poured my soul into every number, every late night, believing hard work would lead to fairness, only to watch it all unravel in a single, gut-punching moment. I was sitting alone in my small apartment in Raleigh, North Carolina, the skyline glowing outside. I'd run 5 miles that morning, like always, to keep my head clear. The dim light from my desk lamp cast long shadows over a half-empty cup of Dunkin' coffee that had gone cold hours ago. Max, my golden retriever, was snoring softly on the couch, blissfully unaware of the storm unraveling inside my mind. Just yesterday, I thought I'd be popping a bottle of champagne. After 6 relentless years grinding as a financial analyst at a Fortune 500 company, I was finally shortlisted for a senior management role. It felt like the reward I had earned, the result of sleepless nights, endless spreadsheets, and the reputation I'd built as the guy who catches the numbers no one else sees. I wasn't just good at my job. I was the one people came to when the numbers didn't make sense. I thought that if you work hard, play fair, and push yourself beyond the limit, you'd get what you deserve. But that fantasy shattered in the most brutal, humiliating way. Budget constraints. Richard, the vice president of finance, said flatly, as if he were reading the weather forecast. The company can't afford to add another management role right now. I sat there in that windowless meeting room, the AC humming loud enough to drown out my own heartbeat. Richard didn't even look me in the eye. No thank you, no recognition, just a vague excuse wrapped in corporate jargon. Stick to your lane, James, he smirked, cutting me off when I pressed about the budget. I smiled. He didn't know I was watching. What made my blood run cold wasn't the rejection itself. It was finding out who got the promotion instead. Ethan, the new guy from our Atlanta branch, he'd only been here 8 months, and his flagship investment report, nearly identical to the one I'd submitted last year. At the time, I'd noticed a few too familiar charts, but I brushed it off. I wanted to believe he was just inspired by my work. Now I knew better. He didn't just copy my work, he got promoted for it. I grew up in a small town outside Charlotte, where my dad, a grease-stained mechanic with calloused hands and a quiet heart, taught me that honest work was the only way to reach the American dream. Back in Charlotte, I'd fish with him on weekends, learning the value of patience and grit. I believed him. I paid off my student loans by 26, lived frugally, climbed the ladder step by step, and thought I was finally on the path to something real. But that afternoon, listening to Richard spew a lie, I felt like the kid who got left on the sidelines while everyone else made the team. I didn't lash out. I didn't raise my voice or storm out. I just nodded, walked back to my desk, and stared at the screen, the numbers swimming in front of me. But inside, something shifted. This wasn't just a professional setback. Something rotten festered. I'd find it. The so-called budget freeze didn't line up with our 12% projected revenue increase next quarter. We had the money. Someone just didn't want me in that role. Maybe because I knew too much. Maybe because I was never meant to be more than the guy who cleans up other people's messes without asking questions. Not this time. I was going to dig, deeper than I ever had. I'd get to the truth, however ugly, however far it reached. And when I did, Ethan wouldn't be the only one exposed. Richard, and whoever else was pulling the strings, would have to answer. And I wouldn't stop until they did. That moment in the meeting room stuck with me, like a splinter you can't pull out. Richard's voice, smooth and practiced, echoed in my head as I walked back to my desk, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like a swarm of angry bees. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been played, not just passed over, but deliberately pushed aside. I'd spent years at this company, pouring my soul into every report, every forecast, every late-night analysis that kept the higher-ups looking good. I'd earned that promotion, and Richard knew it. His excuse about budget constraints was a lie so thin I could see right through it. But I didn't have the proof yet. I wasn't going to storm into his office and demand answers. That's what he'd want. A chance to paint me as unhinged. No, I'd play it smarter. I'd watch, wait, and dig until I found the truth. The next few weeks, I became a ghost in my own office. I showed up, did my work, smiled at the right moments, but every spare second was spent observing. Raleigh's skyline stretched outside the office windows, all glass and steel, a reminder of the corporate machine I was part of. Richard was good at playing the charming boss, always in tailored suits, flashing that Rolex like a badge of honor. But I started noticing cracks. He'd get twitchy when I brought up budget questions in meetings. "Nice try, James," he'd smirk. "Better luck next time." I didn't push back. I just nodded and filed it away. Another piece of the puzzle. I'd always been the guy who noticed things others missed. Back in my hometown near Charlotte, I was the kid who'd spot a loose bolt on my dad's truck before it became a problem. That instinct hadn't left me. At work, I'd caught errors in reports that saved the company from million-dollar mistakes, like the time I flagged a tax oversight during a merger. The CFO had personally thanked me, even mentioned my name to the board. That's when the whispers started. People saying I was on the fast track, maybe even gunning for Richard's job one day. I didn't think much of it then, but now it clicked. Richard wasn't just blocking my promotion to save a few bucks. He saw me as a rival, someone who could expose his weaknesses, and he was right to be scared. One evening, after the office had cleared out, I stayed late, the hum of my laptop the only sound in the empty cubicle farm. I was prepping for a quarterly report, cross-referencing numbers, when I stumbled across something odd, a folder buried deep in the server, labeled Miscellaneous 2024. It was password protected, which was unusual for routine files. Most people would have ignored it, but my gut told me to dig deeper. I tried a few passwords, company acronyms, standard admin codes, until I remembered Richard's obsession with his Pinehurst golf membership. Panhi RST Narnom. On a hunch, I typed in his member ID, and the folder opened. Inside was a secret budget, hiding $400,000 in payments to fake projects. It wasn't just numbers, it was proof, tracking payments to projects that didn't exist on the official books, marketing campaigns with no deliverables, consulting fees to firms I'd never heard of, all with Richard's approval. My hands shook as I scrolled through it, each line a betrayal of the company I'd given my all to. This wasn't a mistake, it was deliberate. Richard was funneling money to his allies, directors he'd drink bourbon with at the country club, guys who'd back him no matter what. I thought about confronting him, but that would have been suicide. He'd spin it, make me the fall guy. I needed to be smarter. I spent the next few nights at my apartment, Max sprawled across the rug. As I pored over the data, I'd pour a glass of Maker's Mark, sit at my kitchen table, and cross-check every transaction against the official records. The more I dug, the uglier it got. There were emails, too, buried in another server folder. Vague exchanges between Richard and a director in operations. Phrases like, "keep it off the books," and "we'll square it later," stood out like neon signs. This wasn't just about my promotion anymore. Richard was running a scheme, and I'd been caught in the crossfire because I was too good at my job. I couldn't help but think about my dad, how he'd always said the world rewards those who do the right thing, even when it's hard. Growing up, I'd watch him work late in his garage, fixing cars for neighbors who couldn't pay, because it was the decent thing to do. I wanted to make him proud, but I also knew this wasn't a small-town garage. This was corporate America, where loyalty gets you nowhere if you're up against someone like Richard. I wasn't naive. I'd seen colleagues get sidelined for less, but I wasn't going to let him win. Not like this. I started building a case, quietly, methodically. I copied the secret budget, encrypted it, and stored it on a USB drive I kept in my sock drawer. I documented every discrepancy, every questionable payment, linking them to Richard's approvals. It was tedious work, the kind that makes your eyes burn and your head ache. But I couldn't stop. Each piece of evidence was a step closer to justice. Not just for me, but for everyone who'd been screwed over by his games. I kept it all hidden. Didn't tell a soul, not my coworkers, not even my girlfriend, Sarah, who'd ask why I was so distracted. I'd just smile and say, work stuff, while Max nudged my leg, sensing something was wrong. Richard didn't suspect a thing. He'd swagger through the office, cracking jokes, acting like he was untouchable. But I saw the truth now, and it changed everything. I wasn't just fighting for a title or a corner office. I was fighting for the kid from Charlotte who believed hard work meant something, for the guy who thought the American dream was real. I didn't know how this would end, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let Richard bury me without a fight. Every night, as I sat at my kitchen table with Max snoring softly by my feet, the weight of what I'd uncovered pressed harder. That secret budget wasn't just a file on a server. It was a ticking bomb, and I held the detonator. Richard thought he had me cornered, thought he could keep me in my place with a smug dismissal and a fake budget excuse. But I wasn't the kid from Charlotte who'd back down anymore. I'd seen the truth, and it lit a fire in me. Not the loud, raging kind, but the quiet, steady burn of someone who knows they're about to turn the tables. I wasn't going to let him walk away from this. Not after he'd tried to bury my future to protect his own. I knew confronting Richard directly would be a mistake. He was too slippery, too connected. He'd twist my words, make me look like a disgruntled employee with a grudge. I'd seen him do it before. Last year, a colleague in accounting questioned a shady vendor contract and was gone within a week, labeled uncooperative. I wasn't going to be the next cautionary tale, but staying silent wasn't an option either. If I let this slide, I'd be complicit, letting Richard's scheme fester while he sipped bourbon with his buddies at the country club. I had to act, but it had to be surgical, undeniable, and out of his reach. That's when it hit me, the annual audit. Every spring, an external firm descended on our Raleigh office like hawks, tearing through our books with a precision that made even the CEO sweat. They were due in 3 weeks, and they didn't play favorites. If I could get the secret budget to them, anonymously, untraceable, they'd do the heavy lifting. The thought sent a jolt through me, equal parts fear and excitement. Whistleblowing wasn't a game. I'd read stories of people losing their careers, their reputations, even when they were right. But I also knew the auditors were my best shot. They'd see the numbers, follow the trail, and Richard wouldn't be able to charm his way out of it. I spent the next few nights planning, my apartment lit only by the glow of my laptop and the occasional flicker of a Carolina thunderstorm outside. Max would nudge my leg, sensing the tension, but I was locked in. I crafted an email, careful to strip it of anything that could point back to me. No personal phrases, no traceable IP. I used a burner account, routed through a VPN I'd set up on my old college laptop. The email was short, clinical. Attached is evidence of secret budget payments. Review the highlighted transactions. I attached the secret budget, now annotated with every discrepancy I'd traced. Dates, amounts, fake projects, all tied to Richard's approvals. My hands hovered over the send button, heart pounding like I was about to jump off a cliff. I thought of my dad, how he'd always said doing the right thing meant taking risks others wouldn't. I hit send at 3 a.m., the sound of rain against my window drowning out the thud of my pulse. The days that followed were a tightrope walk. I went to work, kept my head down, and played the part of the diligent analyst. Richard was his usual self, strutting through the office, cracking jokes about the Tar Heels' latest game, oblivious to the storm I'd set in motion. Every time he passed my desk, I felt a mix of dread and anticipation, like a hunter watching a trap. I kept waiting for a sign the auditors had received my email. A cryptic question, a raised eyebrow, but nothing came. The silence was deafening, and doubt started to creep in. Had I sent it to the wrong address? Had they dismissed it as a prank? I'd lie awake at night, Max curled up beside me, wondering if I'd just torched my career for nothing. But I didn't stop preparing. I double-checked my evidence, made sure every detail was airtight. I even started mapping out what I'd do if this backfired, update my resume, reach out to contacts at other firms in Raleigh. I wasn't going to let Richard's betrayal define me. This wasn't just about getting even. It was about proving I was stronger than his games. I thought about the American dream my dad always talked about, how it wasn't just about money or status, but about standing up for what's right, even when the odds are stacked against you. I was ready to fight, not with fists or shouting matches, but with the truth. And I knew, deep down, that truth was coming for Richard. The email was out there, a silent missile launched into the void, and I had no idea if it had hit its mark. Each day at the office felt like holding my breath underwater, waiting for the surface to break. I kept up the act, crunching numbers, nodding in meetings, forcing a smile when Richard clapped me on the shoulder like we were old pals. But inside, and I was coiled tight, every nerve on edge, expecting the auditors to walk through the door any moment and blow everything wide open. The Raleigh office buzzed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, keyboards clacking, the faint smell of Starbucks coffee lingering in the break room. But to me, it was a battlefield. I'd set something in motion I couldn't undo, and the weight of it sat heavy, like a storm cloud over the Carolina hills. 3 weeks after I sent the email, the auditors arrived. They swept in like a cold front, a team of 6 in sharp suits, their faces unreadable as they set up in the conference room. Laptops hummed, papers shuffled, and the air grew thick with tension. Richard didn't seem fazed at first. He strode around, shaking hands, tossing out his usual charm, acting like the audit was just another Tuesday. But I caught the way his eyes darted to the conference room door, the way his laugh sounded just a little too forced. He was nervous, and that told me everything. My email had landed. The auditors were digging, and they were getting close. I kept my distance, blending into the background, but my heart was racing every time I passed the glass-walled conference room. I'd see the lead auditor, a woman named Diane with a no-nonsense stare, poring over documents, her pen moving with surgical precision. I wondered if she was looking at my secret budget, tracing the same lines I'd spent nights analyzing. I wanted to believe the truth was bulletproof, but doubt gnawed at me. What if Richard had covered his tracks? What if the auditors missed it? I went home each night to my apartment, Max greeting me with a wagging tail, but even his warmth couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. I'd pour a glass of bourbon, sit on my couch and stare at the ceiling, replaying every step I'd taken, wondering if I'd been reckless or brilliant. The final day of the audit came like a thunderclap. The CEO called an all-hands meeting, something rare enough to make everyone whisper. We filed into the boardroom, a sea of anxious faces, the air heavy with the hum of the projector. Richard sat near the front, his posture stiff, his tie perfectly knotted, but his hands fidgeting under the table. The CEO and CFO flanked the auditors, their expressions carved from stone. Diane stood at the podium, her voice steady as she walked through the audit findings. Routine stuff at first, minor issues, procedural tweaks. I sat in the back, my pulse hammering, trying to look calm while my mind screamed for the moment I'd been waiting for. The screen lit up. My numbers glowed. Richard froze. Colleagues gasped. The CFO's jaw clenched tight. Diane clicked to a new slide. And there it was. My secret budget, projected in stark black and white for the entire room to see. The title was innocuous. Budget issues. But the numbers told a different story. Line after line of secret payments. $50,000 to a non-existent marketing campaign. $120,000 to a consulting firm with no record. $200,000 funneled to a project run by one of Richard's golf buddies. Diane's voice cut through the silence, calm but relentless. These payments, approved at the executive level, lack supporting documentation and violate company policy. She didn't name Richard, but she didn't have to. Every eye locked on him, The room so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Richard's face drained of color, then flushed red. He stammered about oversights and miscommunications. But Diane kept going, laying out the evidence like a prosecutor. She clicked to another slide, showing emails, ones I'd found, where Richard instructed a director to keep it quiet and handle it off the books. The CFO's jaw tightened, and the CEO leaned forward, his eyes locked on Richard like a hawk on prey. I sat frozen, my hands gripping the armrests, trying to keep my face neutral. Inside, I was roaring. I'd done it. The truth won. But my fight wasn't over. The board didn't waste time. The CEO stood, his voice low but final. Richard, we'll discuss this privately. Effective immediately. You're relieved of your duties. Gasps rippled through the room. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. 2 security guards appeared at the door, and just like that, he was escorted out, his Rolex catching the light as he stumbled past. The room erupted in whispers, but I stayed silent, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I'd done it. The truth had won, and Richard was finished. But victory didn't feel like I'd imagined. As the meeting broke up, colleagues buzzing with shock, I felt exposed, like I'd stepped into a spotlight too bright to handle. No one knew I was the whistleblower. At least, I hoped they didn't. But I couldn't shake the fear that someone would figure it out. I went back to my desk, staring at my computer screen, the numbers blurring as my mind raced. I'd taken down a giant, but at what cost? Would the company see me as a hero or a traitor? I thought of my dad, how he'd always said the right thing isn't always the easy thing. I'd chosen the hard path, and now I had to live with it. As I drove home that evening, Raleigh's skyline fading in my rearview mirror, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. Max was waiting at the door, his tail wagging like nothing had changed. I sank onto the couch, his head in my lap, and let the weight of the day settle. Richard was gone, his scheme exposed. But I wasn't celebrating. I'd fought for justice, for the kid from Charlotte who believed in fairness, but the fight had left scars. Ethan emailed me later. I was wrong. James, he wrote. I didn't reply. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing. I'd stood up to a bully and won, and that was worth something. The dust settled, but the air in my apartment felt heavier than ever that night. Max sprawled across the rug, his steady breathing the only sound as I sat on my couch, a half-empty bottle of Maker's Mark on the coffee table. Richard was gone, his office cleared out, his name erased from the company directory like he'd never existed. The auditors had done their job, and my anonymous email had sparked a fire that burned his career to the ground. But as I stared out my window at Raleigh's quiet skyline, the victory felt hollow. I'd won, but at what cost? I'd exposed a fraud, stood up for what was right, but the weight of being the one who pulled the trigger lingered, like the ache of a bruise you didn't know you had. A few days later, I got a call from the CEO's assistant. My stomach dropped as I walked into his corner office. The kind of place with mahogany furniture and a view of the city that made you feel small. I braced for the worst. Maybe they'd figured out I was the whistleblower. Maybe I was next to be shown the door. Instead, the CEO stood, extended his hand, and said, "You've been a quiet force around here. James, we need someone like you leading the finance team." He offered me Richard's job, vice president of finance. No probation, no caveats, just a straight shot to the role I'd been denied. I stood there and stunned, the weight of the moment sinking in. I'd fought for my place, not with shouting or scheming, but with the truth, and now it was mine. I took the job, but not without hesitation. I spent a night pacing my apartment, Max trailing me like he knew I was wrestling with something big. I thought about my dad, how he'd worked his hands raw in that Charlotte garage, never asking for more than what he earned. He'd always said the American dream wasn't about the title or the paycheck. It was about building something honest, something that lasts. This wasn't just a promotion. It was a chance to lead with integrity, to rebuild a team that had been poisoned by Richard's games. I said yes, not for the corner office or the salary bump, but because I'd earned it the hard way, and I wasn't going to let fear stop me now. The transition wasn't easy. I walked into my new role with eyes on me, some curious, some skeptical. Richard's allies, the ones who'd benefited from his secret budget, kept their distance, their smiles tight and guarded. I didn't care. I started cleaning house, not with vengeance, but with clarity. I streamlined processes, demanded transparency, and made it clear that no one was above the rules. My team began to trust me, not because I was their boss, but because I showed up every day and did the work. I wasn't perfect. I made mistakes, second-guessed myself, stayed up too late worrying about budgets or board meetings. But I was honest, and that was enough to start rebuilding what Richard had broken. A week after I settled into the role, I got an email from Diane, the lead auditor. It was short, no signature, just a single line. "Thank you for doing what was right." I read it over and over, sitting at my kitchen table with Max's head in my lap. It wasn't praise, not exactly, but it was acknowledgement, a quiet nod from someone who knew the cost of standing up. That email became my anchor, a reminder that the truth, however messy, was worth fighting for. Richard, I heard, was facing a lawsuit, maybe even jail time. His name came up less and less, like a bad dream fading with the morning. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Justice had spoken, and I'd moved on. My story spread on X, inspiring others to expose their own Richards. We built a community, rising together. Life now is quieter, not in a lonely way, but in the way you feel when you've weathered a storm. I'm still in Raleigh, still waking up to Max's wet nose nudging me for his morning walk. I've got a new rhythm, leading meetings, mentoring my team, even finding time to grab a beer with my girlfriend, Sarah, who stuck by me through the chaos. I never wanted a corner office. I'm proud. I built something real. I think about my dad often, how he'd probably chuckle and say I'd fix the company's engine, just like he used to fix cars. The American dream isn't perfect. It's gritty. It's hard-won, but it's real if you fight for it. If you're watching this, I know you've got your own battles. Maybe someone's tried to hold you back, to take what's yours because they couldn't stand your light. I've been there, and I'm here to tell you, don't let them win. You're stronger than their lies, smarter than their games. Share your story in the comments. Tell me about a time you stood up, fought back, or found your way through the dark. The truth is your weapon. No one can take it. And I, James Carter, am just getting started. That's my story of how Finance VP betrayed me for jealousy, but I took him down with fraud evidence at the audit. It wasn't easy, but exposing the whistleblower budget fraud was my revenge for the Finance VP's envy stole my career. The Finance VP's betrayal fueled my revenge, and sharing it as a Reddit revenge stories tale feels right. If you love revenge stories, Reddit Radio TTs, drop your own story in the comments. Have you ever fought back against a toxic boss? Subscribe, and let's keep the revenge fire burning.